Hello there. Welcome to video 149 from Sumit Academy. I do hope that you have subscribed to my channel. Do subscribe now so that you do not miss out on my previous or future videos. And do remember to like and share this video too. To make your task a little easier, here is a complete list of all the 149 videos available on my YouTube channel. The list is divided into the playlists under which they are available. Do have a look. In my earlier videos, we have studied the concept of disaster and disaster management. We've had a look at what causes earthquakes, floods, and drought, their mitigation strategies, and governmental policies regarding all these. In my previous video on cyclones, we had discussed another perennial problem of this nation, the problem of dealing with cyclones. A cyclone, as we learned, is caused by atmospheric disturbances around a low pressure area and is usually accompanied by violent storms and severe weather conditions. We also had a look at previous cyclones as well as some future predictions for our region. Let's now have a look at the National Disaster Management Guidelines for the Management of Cyclones, which was issued in April 2008. First, let's have a look at the cyclone vulnerability in India. A long coastline of about 7,516 kilometers of flat coastal terrain, shallow continental shelf, and population density, geographical location, and physiological features of its coastal areas makes India extremely vulnerable to cyclones and its associated hazards like storm tide, that is, the combined effects of storm surge and astronomical tide. high velocity wind, and heavy rains. Though the frequency of tropical cyclones in the area covering the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea is the least in the world, that is 7% of the global total, their impact on the east coast of India as well as the Bangladesh coast is relatively more devastating. This is evident from the fact that in the last 270 years, 21 of the 23 major cyclones, that is, with a loss of about 10,000 lives or more worldwide, occurred over the area surrounding the Indian subcontinent, that is, India and Bangladesh. Now, this is primarily due to the serious storm tide effect in the area. 13 coastal states and union territories encompassing 84 coastal districts are affected by tropical cyclones. 4 states, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, and West Bengal, and 1 union territory, Puducherry, on the east coast, and 1 state, Gujarat, on the west coast, are more vulnerable to hazards associated with cyclones. Recurring cyclones account for a large number of deaths, loss of livelihood opportunities, loss of public and private property, and severe damage to infrastructure, thus seriously reversing developmental gains at regular intervals. Broad-scale assessment of the population at risk suggests that an estimated 32 crore people, which accounts for almost a third of the country's population, are vulnerable to cyclone-related hazards. Climate change and its resultant sea level rise can significantly increase the vulnerability of the coastal population. The National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project, to be implemented with financial assistance from the World Bank, as is envisaged to have 4 major components. Let's have a look at them. The first, called Component A, deals with the improvement of early warning dissemination system by strengthening the last mile connectivity of cyclone warnings and advisories. Component B deals with cyclone risk mitigation investments. Component C with technical assistance for hazard risk management and capacity building, and Component D with project management and institutional support. These components are highly interdependent and have to be implemented in a coherent manner. A paradigm shift in the approach to disaster management proceeds from the conviction that development cannot be sustainable unless disaster mitigation is built into the developmental process. The cornerstone of the approach is that mitigation has to be multi-sectoral. It has been universally accepted that returns on mitigation investments are very high. Developing appropriate coping strategies and risk reduction plans, along with greater public awareness, is the high priority agenda for disaster management in India. This will have to be based on enhancing national, state, district, and local level advocacy partnerships and knowledge management for mainstreaming disaster risk reduction and developing hazard risk management tools, methodologies, and practices. These guidelines are an important step towards the development of plans for the management of cyclones and their attendant disasters. These have been prepared to provide guidance to the ministries, departments, and state authorities for the preparation of their detailed disaster management plans. These guidelines call for a proactive, participatory, well structured, fail safe, multidisciplinary, and multi sector approach at various levels and are presented in 9 chapters. Chapter 1 provides an introductory overview that reflects the risk and vulnerability of the country to cyclones, including the dimensions and magnitude of the problem. Chapter 2 discusses the early warning systems, that is the EWS for cyclones. The present status of EWSs has been discussed and the gaps have been identified. Requirement to bring them up to international standards and making them state-of-the-art systems has been recommended. Chapter 3 deals with the present status of warning, communication, and dissemination, its gaps and future improvements required towards making it fail-proof and modern, while Chapter 4 covers structural measures for preparedness and mitigation, covering cyclone shelters, buildings, road links, culverts, and bridges, canals, drains, saline embankment surface water tanks, cattle mounts, and communication and power transmission networks. In Chapter 5, important aspects of the management of coastal zones and its relevance to cyclone disaster management, including some other non-structural mitigation options, have been presented. This chapter discusses issues related to coastal zone management, sustainability of coastal resources, bioshields, coastal floodplain management, coastal erosion, natural resources management, and so on and so forth. Chapter 6 deals with various aspects of awareness generation related to cyclone disaster management as an important preparedness measure, while Chapter 7 covers disaster risk management issues, risk assessment, and vulnerability analysis, hazard zoning and mapping, data generation, including the use of GIS tools, and capacity development. Chapter 8 deals with cyclone disaster management related response and relief strategies. A detailed account of several issues related to effective response, such as response platforms, linking risk knowledge with response planning, evolving disaster response capabilities, etc., is brought out in this chapter. Finally, in Chapter 9, guidelines and implementation strategies have been discussed. Other supportive guidelines, such as preparation of disaster management and vulnerability reduction action plans, coordination at all levels of government, mobilization of financial resources, and implementation methodology, etc., are discussed. The guidelines also has some salient action points. Now, major action points are listed at the end of each chapter. let us have a look at some of the salient initiatives recommended for implementation as part of the national guidelines for the management of cyclones. First, Ministry of Earth Sciences, India Meteorological Department, and academic and research and development institutions have been tasked with establishing a state of the art cyclone early warning system involving observations, predictions, and warnings, and customized local scale advice for decision makers for managing the impact of cyclones. Secondly, Ministry of Earth Sciences, Ministry of Defense, the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy, the India Met Department, the Department of Space, and the National Remote Sensing Agency. Now, all these people have been tasked with commissioning of aircraft probing of cyclone facility with a combination of manned aircraft and high altitude UAVs, that is, unmanned aerial vehicles. These can effectively fill the critical observational data gaps in the case of cyclones over the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea to a great extent. An actual flight by an aircraft into and around the tropical cyclone during various stages of its development and movement can provide invaluable data for studying and understanding the structure and movement of a cyclone, thus reducing track and intensity prediction errors significantly. Thirdly, Operation Centers of NDMA, Ministry of Home Affairs, Survey of India, Department of Space, Ministry of Earth Sciences, Department of Science and Technology, and the National Spatial Data Infrastructure have been tasked with commissioning of the National Disaster Communication Infrastructure at the NDMA and the Ministry of Home Affairs, state disaster management authorities of coastal states, union territories, and district disaster management authorities of the 84 coastal districts which are vulnerable to cyclones. How? With the adoption of state of the art operational infrastructure. Fourthly, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and the Ministry of Earth Sciences have been tasked to expand the warning dissemination outreach by using the services of DTH, direct to home transmission, in remote and rural areas, which cannot be otherwise covered, to introduce Weather Channel and broadcast cyclone warnings from high power coastal radio stations, including the use of satellite radio service like World Space, ham radios, community radio, and VHF networks. Fifthly, Ministry of Urban Development and Poverty Alleviation, Bureau of Indian Standards, Country and Town Planning, Municipal Administrations, Panchayati Raj and Planning Departments, Development Authorities, and Planning Boards of coastal states and union territories have been asked to carry out specific measures for taking structural measures for cyclone risk mitigation. Now, these include structural safety of lifeline infrastructure in coastal areas, establishing a robust system of locating multi-purpose cyclone shelters and cattle pounds, ensuring cyclone-resistant design standards are incorporated in the rural and urban housing schemes in coastal areas. It also includes building all-weather road links to all coastal habitations, maintaining the full designed carrying capacity of main drains and canals, along with feeder channels, creating additional flow canals in frequently inundated areas, and construction of saline embankments to prevent ingress of saline water associated with cyclonic storm surge, and most important, encouraging public private partnership with corporates and trusts. Sixth, other major steps recommended for action include effective cyclone risk reduction through management of coastal zones, mapping and delineation of coastal wetlands, patches of mangroves and shelter belts, regulating infrastructure and development activities in coastal zones, and evolving ecosystem restoration plans for degraded ecological zones. It calls for establishing a comprehensive cyclone disaster management information system for providing online services to the departments of disaster management in the states and institutionalizing specific emergency response, that is the ER actions for cyclone disaster management. What is the impact of cyclones? Well, cyclones are characterized by the destructive potential to damage structures such as houses, lifeline infrastructure such as power and communication towers, hospitals, food storage facilities, roads, bridges, culverts, crops, etc. How? Due to the high velocity winds. Exceptionally heavy rainfall causes flooding. Storm surge inundates low-lying areas in the coastal areas, resulting in loss of life and destruction of property. Besides eroding beaches and embankments, destroying vegetation, and reducing soil fertility. Besides the loss of lives and livestock, cyclones have high destructive potential due to the strong winds that damage structures and heavy rainfall which causes floods and storm surge that inundates low-lying coastal areas. Although it is not possible to completely avoid natural disasters, their effects can be minimized by taking some known long and short term structural and non structural mitigation measures, such as developing proper early warning systems, creating awareness at all levels in the concerned communities, coastal afforestation, construction of shelters, embankments, dikes, coastal roads, bridges, canals, etc., through better preparedness, mitigation measures, and improved response mechanisms. Let us also have a quick look at some of the past initiatives by some of our states. There have been some efforts in the past by some of the most vulnerable states by taking up institutionalized mitigation efforts. The first effort was the World Bank assisted Cyclone Emergency Reconstruction Project, taken up by the government of Andhra Pradesh in 1990 itself, following the severe cyclone of May 1990. Now, this is referred to as one of the first initiatives heralding the paradigm shift to a holistic approach of cyclone risk management in the country. In the aftermath of another devastating cyclone that affected the northern Andhra Pradesh coast in 1996, the government of Andhra Pradesh set up a separate disaster management unit, a DMU, to implement the World Bank funded Andhra Pradesh Hazard Mitigation and Emergency Cyclone Recovery Project, which is now functioning as the Andhra Pradesh State Disaster Mitigation Society. The government of Odisha constituted the Odisha State Disaster Mitigation Authority to have a systematic and planned approach to disaster management in the state, with the objective of making the people of the state more disaster resilient. It coordinates various activities of disaster mitigation in the state, including capacity building of the community and disaster managers, and strengthening of infrastructure, improvement in communication systems, etc. The government of Odisha has constituted 5 units of the Odisha Disaster Rapid Action Force, which is specially trained and equipped force to deal with cyclones and other disasters. They are stationed at Jharsuguda, Balasore, Cuttack, Chhatrapur and Koraput. In addition to the other modes of communication, Odisha has established an extensive VHF network connecting different levels of administration and the community to communicate cyclone warnings and advisories. Besides, the state government has undertaken several initiatives for multi-hazard mitigation in the state. In the aftermath of the Bhuj earthquake in January 2001, a massive reconstruction program was launched by the Gujarat state government with financial assistance from multilateral funding agencies, including the World Bank. The Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority was established for the implementation of the reconstruction program. Further, the GSDMA has come out with a composite risk atlas to help the concerned departments of the state in disaster mitigation planning in the areas most vulnerable to natural and man-made hazards. The taluks most vulnerable to cyclones have been mapped by utilizing the GIS, that is the Geographic Information System tools. In the immediate aftermath of the December 2004 tsunami, the Government of India took a far-reaching decision to set up an institutional mechanism for effective disaster management with a vision to transforming the approach towards disaster management in the country. In March 2005, the Disaster Management Bill was introduced in both houses of Parliament, which became an act in December 2005. The erstwhile relief-centric and post-event syndrome was said to change to a well-orchestrated process that focuses on the important but neglected areas of prevention, mitigation, preparedness, and more robust and efficient measures for response, rehabilitation, and recovery. Let's also have a look at the Disaster Management Act of 2005. Now, this act lays down institutional, legal, financial, and coordination mechanism at the central, state, district, and local levels. Now, these institutions are not parallel structures and will work in close harmony. The institutional framework will ensure implementation of the national will for a paradigm shift in disaster management from a post-event and relief-centric syndrome to a regime that lays greater emphasis on more prompt and effective response to disasters. The guidelines provide for strengthening cyclone disaster management in the country on a sustainable basis. Now, these guidelines have set modest goals and objectives to be achieved by mobilizing all stakeholders through an inclusive and participative approach. Appropriate allocation of financial and other resources, including dedicated manpower and targeted capacity development, would be the key to the success of implementing the guidelines. The approach followed will emphasize on comprehensive cyclone safety and risk reduction measures, including structural and non-structural preparedness measures. They will be environment and technology friendly, sensitive to the special requirements of vulnerable groups, and will address all stakeholders involved in cyclone disaster management. You see, for too long, disaster management in India was marginalized as an issue of providing relief and rehabilitation to the people affected by natural calamities. Now, the new vision of the Government of India is a paradigm shift in the approach to disaster management. From the erstwhile relief and response-centric approach to a holistic and integrated approach, which will also be proactive prevention, mitigation, and preparedness-driven approach. These efforts will conserve developmental gains besides minimizing loss to lives, livelihood, and property. This would, therefore, be the underlying principle for the allocation of adequate funds at all levels for the prevention, mitigation, and preparedness, along with strengthening the relief and rehabilitation machinery. Well, that's all from me in this video. I do hope that you have had a look at my earlier video on cyclones too. This video is based on the information freely available on the internet. No originality is claimed for the same. The intention of this video is only to prepare candidates for answering examination questions on the subject and not for any financial gains. Do like and share this video and do subscribe to my channel now so that you do not miss out on my previous or future videos. Till later then, cheerio.